praises the Sultan for resorting to consultation in all matters. In this tablet, Baha'u'llah repeatedly lauds him for the reformation of the Ottoman Empire and says that for this reason God has honored him with his attribute Al-Hamid, the praised one. So Abdul Hamid means the servant of the praised one. God had adorned the throne of his cause with a just and equitable sultan and exalted him with his name, the praised one, as a token of his grace and a sign of his mercy. And there are other tablets where Baha'u'llah praises Abdul Hamid. And overall, actually, when we read Baha'u'llah's tablets, he states that the real aim of the prophets of God, and his real aim, was only the reformation of the world or the rehabilitation of the peoples of the earth, which is Islah al-Alam in Arabic. And Baha'u'llah claims himself to be the life giver and world reformer in a few tablets, actually. And so, as I said, Baha'u'llah presented himself as an advisor to the sultans for the betterment of the world, of the situation of the people, also in the Ottoman Empire, for the reformation of state affairs, and continuously lauded the good governance of Abdul Hamid II. And as I said, we have no record of an unjust treatment towards the Baha'is by Abdul Hamid II from 1876 until the passing of Baha'u'llah in 1892. Only afterwards, as we know from Baha'i history, and through the instigations of Abdul-Baha's half-brother Mirza Muhammad Ali, Abdul Hamid became hostile and molested Abdul-Baha. We know that already very early in his life and in his father's lifetime, Abdul-Baha presented himself concerned with the political situation in Iran and in the Ottoman Empire and discussed the political climate during the reform period in both empires. And in one of the recorded talks of Abdul-Baha, it is said that he said that the thoughts of the statements of the East were weak, their hearts devoid of desire for the progress of the nation, their ideas petty, selfish, local, and not general. They thought of their own interests rather than of those of the country. They think more of the advancement of their own interests than of those of the country. They are not far-seeing patriots, but inexperienced tyros. They sell the resources of their country if they think that by so doing they can fill their own pockets. It's very, very sharp critique of Abdul-Baha. But as I said, he had also very positive contacts with Ottoman statesmen. For example, with this governor of Edirne. So when Baha'u'llah and his family were exiled in Edirne, living there for almost 5 years, they had very positive contacts with Khurshid Pasha. And we know from Baha'i history that Abdul-Baha, already in his 20s, was widely known for his qualities and deep intellect. And Ottoman officials high and low were his admirers, actually. And Khurshid Pasha, the governor of Edirne, at one point apparently consulted him about the future of the Ottoman Empire. And Abdul-Baha told him a story about a sick man who was given opium by the watchman that made him sleep. And contrary to the doctor's advice, and so the sick man got worse. And Abdul-Baha told the governor, "It is your watch time. You are not doing anything to improve the condition of the sick country. You're putting it to sleep by giving it narcotics. And when you leave your position, what do you care whether the patient will live or die? You have had your night's sleep. Instead of watching the patient solicitously and putting him through, you prefer your own rest and comfort." That was the observation of Abdul-Baha. So, and then briefly, what Abdul-Baha contributed to reform in Iran and the Ottoman Empire was the first tract he wrote was, we know, is The Secret of Divine Civilization, which actually is called by Shoghi Effendi Abdul-Baha's outstanding contribution to the future reorganization of the world. He wrote and published it anonymously, and it was the second Baha'i book ever printed. The first was, as we know, um, the Kitab-i-Iqan of the Book of Certitude of Baha'u'llah, and the second one was Abdul-Baha's Secret of Divine Civilization. And so it illustrates the importance it was given to this book by Abdul-Baha. And he actually addresses a non-Baha'i audience, mainly the Iranians. And at a time when modernization and reform were important contemporary issues in Iran and influenced by Ottoman reforms, actually. And so Abdul-Baha suggests that he was writing as a concerned citizen, offering constructive ideas pertinent to the ultimate well-being of his native country. And we also know that Baha'u'llah actually instructed Abdul-Baha to compose something about the rehabilitation of the world. So, and then in one of the tablets, Baha'u'llah says, the reason that work was composed is as follows. One day, the most mighty branch of God, meaning Abdul-Baha, was standing in the most sublime and most holy presence, Baha'u'llah, when the tongue of the Ancient of Days, exalted be he, spoke these words. O most mighty branch, it would be commendable if some pages were written on the causes of the world's destruction and the means for its reconstruction, in such wise that it would humble the prejudiced to a degree that this may prepare them to listen to the rustling of the low tree of utterance, meaning listening to Baha'u'llah, which can be heard in this day. And then it continues, other themes of this sort were also heard from Baha'u'llah, and consequently Abdul-Baha composed The Secret of Divine Civilization. The other treatise which Abdul-Baha composed in about 1892 is called the Risale Siyasiyeh, which can be translated as Treatise on Politics or the Art of Governance, and it is a response to the events during the Tobacco Revolt in Iran between 1890 to 92, and it's also a discussion of politics and society. There, basically, Abdul-Baha says that man-made laws are not enough to enable human progress, that divine law or religion is indispensable to educate the people. And he especially says, as he says in many other tablets, that the interference of religious leaders, especially the ignorant ones, in political affairs is dangerous. I guess we can see it in some of the Islamic countries as well. And so we know that Abdul-Baha's treatise on politics was also presented to the Shah and distributed among the notables of Iran. And I will continue with a Turkish tablet, actually, by Abdul-Baha about Ottoman and Iranian reform. And this is probably the only known direct reference to the Tanzimat, to Ottoman reforms by Abdul-Baha. So Abdul-Baha basically speaks about Iran's worsening conditions. He says that were caused by ignorant ulama, the clerics, and Iran's need for reform after the model of the Ottomans. And his emphasis is actually on secular reforms in this regard. And he repeatedly says that the Muslim clerics should not be concerned with, they should only be concerned with spiritual and ethical matters and not with politics. He says it is not theirs to interfere in the affairs of the government, to oppose the just government, to cause the kingdom and nation to be in a deplorable condition and drown the people in ignorance. As I mentioned, we have Mithat Pasha, and we have an interesting encounter of Mithat Pasha. As I said, he was twice prime minister in the Ottoman Empire, and when he was basically forced to exile to Syria, he was made governor of Syria for 2 years. And at some point in May 1880, during the inspection tour in Ottoman Syria or Ottoman Palestine, Mithat Pasha went to the Haifa Akka area, and we have, excuse me, and we have an unpublished memoir, which I also mentioned in one of my articles by the Baha'i Mirza Haydar Ali. So in that he quotes Mithat Pasha having said, "For years I have longed to meet him," meaning Abdul-Baha. "I have seen his utterances in Turkish that are beyond like or equal and eloquently testify to his vast knowledge. I have often heard many of the learning highly praising and extolling him." Later we learned that Mithat Pasha invited Abdul-Baha um, 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 to Beirut. Actually, before that, I forgot to mention it. Before that, Abdul-Baha invited Mithat Pasha to the Garden of Rezwan near Akka, which Baha'is know from Baha'i pilgrimage. And so Mithat Pasha was guest of Abdul-Baha for a few days at the Garden of Rezwan near Akka, and being impressed with Abdul-Baha and his, his knowledge and everything, Abdul-Baha invited Mithat Pasha invited Abdul-Baha to Beirut, and we know from Shoghi Effendi and also from Hassan Balyuz's book about Abdul-Baha that Abdul-Baha traveled to Beirut to meet Mithat Pasha and some other important people in Beirut actually. And Shoghi Effendi ascribes a very important, he says it was a very important visit of Abdul-Baha in Beirut because he met many, he associated with officials, notables, and leading ecclesiastics, and who in increasing number had besought Abdul-Baha's presence. And with this, he says that Abdul-Baha succeeded in raising the prestige of the cause he had championed to a level it had never previously attained. Here you see some publications in Ottoman journals and newspapers that also publish photographs of Abdul-Baha. And we know that Abdul-Baha was freed by the Young Turks in 1908. So immediately after the Young Turk Revolution in July 1908, in August 1908, Abdul-Baha was released with other political prisoners from his imprisonment and by this general amnesty of the Young Turks. And often in his talks in the West, Abdul-Baha praised actually the Committee of Union and Progress for releasing him and for their efforts for freedom in the Ottoman Empire. And Abdul-Baha was stating his appreciation for his liberation before it was clear that the military wing of the Committee of Union and Progress would take over and cause him trouble, actually, which we'll see later as well. And until now, we didn't know how Abdul-Baha was freed from his imprisonment. But then later, by looking at Turkish letters at the Baha'i World Center, which I had the honor to study, he says that he wrote after his release that he had quietly developed contacts with the civilian parliamentarian wing of the Young Turk circuits in Istanbul and Thessaloniki in present-day Greece during the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid. So in those Turkish letters, actually, Abdul-Baha praises the Committee of the Young Turks and supports their goals. One of the main figures and part of the Young Turk movement actually was especially this Ottoman statesman, Hassan Bedrettin Pasha or Bedri Pasha, who was a military commander, writer, and translator from French. And because he was involved as a young soldier in the deposition of Sultan Abdulaziz, he was exiled to Palestine and Syria as a colonel. And after 1908, after the Young Turk Revolution, Bedri was governor general in one of the Albanian provinces. And in two Persian Baha'i sources, he is mentioned as Bedri Bey, as being exiled to Akka and being the translator of Abdul-Baha from French to Persian, and that he was a Baha'i actually. So one of the physicians of Abdul-Baha, Habib Muayyad, says Bedri Bey, who later became Bedri Pasha, was one of the prisoners of Akka, was extremely bright and well educated. Frequently he attained the presence of the master of Abdul-Baha, and subsequently he became a believer. And the second physician, later physician of Abdul-Baha, Yunus Khan Afrukhte, says that prominent people such as Bedri Pasha humbly walked behind him, behind Abdul-Baha, bowed themselves before the shrine of Baha'u'llah, and emulated Abdul-Baha in kissing the threshold as they entered the shrine itself. And in one of his talks in the United States later, Abdul-Baha says actually that he says the cause of God has always appeared from the East, but it has been more effective in the West. And then Abdul-Baha quotes Bedri Pasha saying in an address, "Gentlemen, Westerners have taken everything from us, the sciences, the arts, and the laws they took from the East. Now we fear that they may wrest from us the cause of Baha'u'llah as well." And then Abdul-Baha says, responding to this, "Those were his words, but Baha'u'llah is neither of the East nor of the West, neither of the South nor of the North." Bedri Pasha is mentioned in a non-Baha'i source as someone, as the person actually with whom Abbas Effendi was most cordial and passed most of the time of the day within Akka and spoke Persian for hours. Bedri Pasha is described as being a benign and very intelligent man who was fluent in speaking and writing Arabic, Persian, and French, and having translated many operas from the French into Turkish, in addition to being skilled in calligraphy that he used to write with his fingernails. Here we see a photo of Bedri Pasha with two of his daughters, and there are about 30 Turkish letters of Abdul-Baha at the Baha'i World Center to Bedri Pasha with some political content actually. So in some of these letters, Abdul-Baha praises actually Bedri Pasha for his exceptional administration in Albania. And he encourages Bedri to establish unity based on Baha'i core beliefs by abolishing division and enmity among the diverse people of the province. He says that it is crucial to deliver the people from ignorance and inertia and bring them into the civilized world. And for this, Abdul-Baha says, the means for this foremost achievement is the diffusion of knowledge and education, making it accessible to all, and to so delivering the diverse sects from evils and foolish prejudices. And furthermore, Abdul-Baha says that it was due to the divine confirmation which Bedri Pasha received that the people and tribes of this province of Ishkodra, who are the most fanatical in Albania, live in comfort and peace in the province. He says that the province was different from the other provinces as regards the perfect safety and peace in such a time of tumult and rebellion. And Abdul-Baha says actually that a practical and beneficial step for the security of the country would be the construction of roads everywhere in the mountainous province. Here you see Bedri Pasha with his with other military men and soldiers in Albania, and so maybe we should mention that at the time of Abdul-Baha, Baha'i identity was somehow fluid. So, Abdul-Baha says that one can be Jewish, one can be Christian, Muslim, and at the same time Baha'i, and so on. So, if you see this military man, serving the Ottoman Empire and being a Baha'i, so you can see that it was you know, this Baha'i identity was not really established, if you will, as in later decades. There's a Persian tablet by Abdul-Baha addressing the young Turks, actually, which he wrote in Alexandria, where he addresses the Committee of Union and Progress. And there, Abdul-Baha actually compares the ideals and goals of the young Turks with those of the Baha'is. He says that both seek freedom, love liberty, hope for equality, are well-wishers of humanity and ready to sacrifice their lives to unite humanity. But Abdul-Baha says that the goals of the Committee of the Young Turks is concerned with physical the world and is only for the Ottoman Empire. And Abdul-Baha says the goals of the Baha'is are broader and for all of humanity. And then at the end, Abdul-Baha says, it follows that the aims of the Baha'is are identical with the aims of the liberals of the Committee of Union and Progress. Nevertheless, the scope of the aims of the Baha'is is broader, meaning that it's more envisioning a world society rather than limited to the Ottoman Empire. And here also in the same tablet, Abdul-Baha also says that he cautions the young Turks not to rely only on conventional politics, and says that however much human politics shows progress, it is nothing compared to divine politics. Divine politics is the light of the physical world and an immeasurable mercy that encompasses all peoples and nations. Therefore, we need to follow divine politics, especially in this glorious century and this age of the progress of humanity, in which nothing but divine politics leads to success. And then Abdul-Baha also says, now all the peoples of the East must be content and happy with this politics and delighted in the pervading influence of the teachings of Baha'u'llah in Europe and America. And lastly, Abdul-Baha calls on the Baha'is to do all in their power to familiarize themselves with the benevolent aims of the young Turks and respond to its just endeavors by assisting it. And this was actually granted to the Baha'is when Abdul-Baha visited the United States in 1912. And in the first week when he visited Washington, D.C. in April 1912, the very first week of his travels in the United States, we know that he received a brilliant reception that was given in his honor, at which many prominent members of Washington society met Abdul-Baha. And Shogh Effendi says that this occasion ranked as one of the highlights of the unforgettable mission he undertook in the service of his father's cause. And among the people of eminence who met Abdul-Baha was also the Ottoman ambassador to Washington, Yusuf Zia Pasha. And we know from Marzia Gale, a Baha'i author who wrote about her father, Ali Kuli Khan, who was actually the Persian, how do you say, like consul, if you will, in America, and later even in Istanbul. She mentions that her father, Ali Kuli Khan, and his wife, Florence, gave a luncheon and reception at the Iranian embassy in honor of Yusuf Zia Pasha, this Ottoman ambassador. And Abdul-Baha gave a talk, and the Pasha, being a fierce Muslim, is said to have been full of deep wonder and stated, "This is irrefutable, this is pure logic." So, responding to Abdul-Baha's talk. A few days later, we learned that the Ottoman ambassador actually invited the illustrious Abdul-Baha, and then again Ali Kuli Khan and his wife and the group of Baha'is were invited to dine at the Ottoman embassy. And at the table, we learned that Zia Pasha was beaming and looked at his guests with tear-filled eyes. Abdul-Baha gave a talk about the unity of the East and the West, and Zia Pasha made an address and called Abdul-Baha the unique one of the age, who had come to spread his glory and perfection amongst us. And the reply of Abdul-Baha was simply, "I'm not worthy of this." And at the meeting, at the end of the meeting, Zia Pasha said, "Truly, he is a saint." And then we learned that Zia Pasha became really enamored of Abdul-Baha and called upon him day after day and attended certain of his talks, and was also touring the city with him. There are other issues before Yusuf Zia Pasha invited actually Abdul-Baha to the Ottoman embassy. He wrote to Istanbul asking if it would be advisable to invite Abdul-Baha to the Ottoman embassy because of the delicate situation and the delicate relation with Iran. So, but he says he could not refute to invite Abdul-Baha because of his positive reception by eminent people of in America, his constant praises of the Committee of Union and Progress that displayed justice and liberated Abdul-Baha, and the gathering given in his honor by the Iranian embassy, at which Yusuf Zia Pasha was present. So he says that the Ottoman embassy could not be indifferent toward inviting Abdul-Baha. And so he says, therefore, he honored Abdul-Baha and some of his followers with a dinner. And so he asked about that before and wrote later on also about the meeting. And as a response for this, actually, for this positive reception by the Ottoman embassy of Abdul-Baha and some Baha'is, um, Yusuf Pasha adds that this was received positively and that his followers wrote a letter of gratitude to be forwarded to the Young Turk government, hoping that the Baha'is may be of assistance to the Committee of Union and Progress. So we have actually this, I mentioned this 2 weeks ago in my last talk, we have this handwritten letter by Baha'is of the United States with some of, I would say, 800 signatures of early American Baha'is from different communities, and thanking actually the Young Turk government in Istanbul for liberating Abdul-Baha and for displaying justice towards the Baha'is. I will read this letter. They say, to the Committee of Union and Progress, with the utmost thankfulness do we, the undersigned, submit this letter to the Committee of Union and Progress in order to express our heartfelt appreciation of the good work accomplished by that enlightened committee. The former despotic government of Turkey, meaning that of Sultan Abdulhamid II, incarcerated Abbas Effendi in prison, but when the respected Committee of Union and Progress hoisted the banner of liberty and freedom, they established justice and gave succor and help to all the oppressed. Through their efforts, Abbas Effendi was liberated and is now traveling in these United States of America. His activities are directed towards international peace and the conciliation and unification of all mankind. We, the friends of Abbas Effendi, are in the greatest joy that he is free and able to travel in our land. With profound gratitude do we offer our thanks to the respected Committee of Union and Progress for their service to humanity. It is our hope that we may be of assistance to the Committee of Union and Progress. And here we see some examples of those signatures. It has signatures of early Baha'is, like that of Thornton Chase, for example, the first American Baha'i, or Stanwood Cobb, and many others. Now, when we come to the later context of Abdul-Baha, or the Baha'is and the Young Turks, we see, as I mentioned, that he was received very positively at the Ottoman embassy and the Iranian embassy in Washington. And later, actually, Ali Kuli Khan, who I just mentioned, who was at those receptions with Abdul-Baha and was also translating for him, he was actually made Ottoman consul of Iran in Istanbul. And his daughter Marzia Kale says actually that both the Persian legation and the Turkish embassy, legally even in America, the countries themselves, opened their doors to the one-time prisoner. We remember too how much malevolence had been directed towards Baha'u'llah from the Persian embassy at Constantinople, which ultimately for a time was to be headed by Ali Kuli Khan, a Baha'i. Again, the last member of the Qajar dynasty, Ahmad Shah, that dynasty which had sent thousands of Baha'is to their death, would be hosted by Khan at the same embassy in Constantinople and would come to rely heavily on this follower of Baha'u'llah. Later, as I said, the militant wing took over the Young Turk government in 1913, and there the relations of Abdul-Baha with the Young Turk actually worsened, and these three dictatorial pashas actually they were opposed to Abdul-Baha and the Baha'is, especially Jamal Pasha, who you see here. So he was very hostile towards Abdul-Baha, also instigated by false accusations made by Abdul-Baha's half-brother Muhammad Ali and his followers. And believing the statements of Muhammad Ali and his allies among Ottoman officials. Jamal Pasha promised that on his return from the conquest of the Suez Canal, he would kill Abdul-Baha by crucifying him, or kill him by hanging or death by firing squat, according to the wish of Abbas Effendi. This is all mentioned in Baha'i sources. And Abdul-Baha later stated that Jamal Pasha was a cruel, boisterous, impetuous, and barbarous man beyond any description. They constantly provoke him against us, never leaving him alone, ceaselessly sowing seeds of doubt. But later, when he met Abdul-Baha in Palestine, near Akka actually, we learned that Jamal Pasha's anger subsided and he enjoyed Abdul-Baha's presence. We have an encounter of this, according to a Baha'i source, that Jamal Pasha arrived at Akka and called Abdul-Baha to his presence. And so Abdul-Baha goes to his military tent. Jamal Pasha greets him, came close, and invited the master to come and sit near him. Then he immediately roared, you are a religious mischief maker, and for this reason the government has exiled you. Later, Abdul-Baha would relate, I realized that he was drunk and prideful to such a point that if a chain or a piece of metal was handed to him, he would tear it apart. Therefore, I thought since he was a Turk, it was best for me to reply in such a way that would make him laugh and would also, of necessity, quiet him. I replied to him, there are two kinds of troublemakers, political and religious. Then, before the audience, I pointed to him and continued, praise be to God that so far no harm has come from the political mischief makers. During the reign of Abdul Hamid, Jamal Pasha was known as a political troublemaker. So, inshallah, Abdul-Baha continued, no harm will come from this religious mischief maker. And with that, Jamal Pasha burst into loud laughter and joyfully said, by God, you are right. And then later, Jamal Pasha asked Abdul-Baha, what is the cause of the Ottoman Empire's weakness? And Abdul-Baha responded, the existence of conflicting religions. And then Jamal Pasha asked, what is the remedy? And Abdul-Baha replied, that the leaders of all religions and denominations existing within the Ottoman Empire and Islamic lands gather in Constantinople and after consultations agree on a single and unifying religion. Once more, Jamal Pasha said, by God, you are right. And then Habib Muayyad continues in his description about Abdul-Baha's life. The Pasha's anger and enmity subsided, and he expressed a desire for a second meeting. He said, I'm now proceeding to Egypt to conquer that region and to drive the enemy into the sea and the Suez Canal. After my return, I will take you to Constantinople. There I will gather the religious leaders and force them into unity and agreement in one religion. Here your station is not evident. But we know this did not happen. After this positive encounter of Jamal Pasha with Abdul-Baha, actually, the Pasha's attitude once again changed for the worse due to the negative reports sent to him about Abdul-Baha, and he again promised to crucify Abdul-Baha after he returned from his victorious military campaign. But this did not take place, and the Ottoman troops were defeated by the British army. And at the beginning of the World War I, actually, Abdul-Baha planned to take practical steps to intervene peacefully against belligerents. He intended to convene a gathering of leading Muslim and Christian leaders in Ottoman Palestine, where Abdul-Baha hoped to advise them to cooperate to avoid disorder and chaos in the region. Abdul-Baha was prevented by opponents from doing so. Despite this, Abdul-Baha was, as we know, occupied with local affairs and took over the task of providing food for the people in the region during World War I, who suffered from the mismanagement of the Ottomans, actually. And here I stop and thank you for your patience. If there are any questions, we can proceed.
Thank you so much, Necati. That was fascinating. And I need to apologize to some people because we were unable to get the live stream to work for the first 20, 25 minutes or so, but I finally was able to fix the problem.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm not. It didn't even get recorded. So we may want to try and go back and record the material up through around slide 15 or so at some point. But we could always do that later because that's mostly background material. It's not as important. The section when we start talking about Baha'u'llah's interactions is, I remember at slide 12 or slide 15, something like that. And
sorry for that.
that would be particularly helpful to have re-recorded, and we might be able to do that at some point. Probably not today, but perhaps later on. There was one question that someone had posted, and I have 3 questions that have occurred to me during the course of this discussion. Let me go up to the question here that someone had. Let's see. This was a kind of general question. Some academics believe that Baha'u'llah's teachings were influenced by new ideas in Istanbul and the West. How would you respond to that, if you don't mind answering that question?
Influence, okay. It depends how you see it. I'm sorry. I would say Baha'u'llah simply responded to some ideas from the West or to Ottoman ideas. It depends if you see it from the Baha'i perspective or from a non-Baha'i perspective. I mean, as a non-Baha'i, you could easily say he was influenced, but from a Baha'i perspective, if you're a believer, you basically say Baha'u'llah was in no need to be influenced by by other ideas, but he responded, or he wrote about, or he interacted with philosophers, with reformers. So it's a matter of perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, because after all, Baha'u'llah is not going to try and answer questions from the 25th century, since he was living for 600 years before then. He has to deal with the materials and the questions that are going to come up during his lifetime. He can stretch, of course, the perspective beyond that time, but he nevertheless has an audience, and he has to answer the questions of his audience to be paid attention to. So that obviously is going to shape what he's going to talk about. One person asks about the 800 signatures, and could we get those signatures at some point? And I don't think I've seen that letter myself, so I haven't seen the signatures either. But it's probably in the archives, I suppose.
It's at the Ottoman archives. I of course I have copies of that, but what I was asked after the last my last talk 2 weeks ago by someone, if I could share it publicly. What I did, I sent it to the archives of the Baha'is of the United States to Edward. So you have that, but what I intend to do is to publish the original document with a transcription of those signatures, as far as I can read them, and maybe in the publication of the Baha'i World, maybe, or some other, or maybe the journal you're intending to start. So I would not share it for now publicly, but I intend to publish it myself.
Good. It could always be a research note if it's just simply a description of the article, and the Korean True Center has already been publishing research notes on its website, though I'm hoping eventually we'll actually have a sort of separate place for them, but we've got a start on that. I was curious when you made a reference to Abdul-Baha commenting about all of the young Turks and such that he had contact with. It seemed like that was the implication was that one of the reasons he was safe in 1906, 1907 was because of those contacts. And is that the case? And sort of what evidence do we have? Who was he in contact with who might have helped to protect him?
Yes, actually, I intended to have a longer presentation, but I thought it would be maybe too long. He had actually, in those Turkish letters he wrote after his release, he so basically he had contact with this Bedri Pasha I mentioned. He was friends with in Akka and Haifa, and I think it was through Bedri Pasha that he had this link to liberal Young Turks then in Istanbul and then in Thessaloniki in Greece, which was actually the main center of the Young Turks in the beginning.
Huh.
And there's especially one intellectual and initially Young Turk, also a mystic at the same time, Mehmet Tahir Bey, actually, his name is. And so Abdul-Baha has also letters written to him. And then there appears to be a Baha'i in Istanbul, who we only know from these letters, who is called Ahmet Sheikhi Effendi, who also somehow had contacts with Young Turks and then also forwarded letters to Abdul-Baha and by Abdul-Baha, so vice versa. So Abdul-Baha basically says in one of these Turkish letters, he quietly or even secretly during the reign of Abdulhamid established contacts with these Young Turks. So they all had a positive idea and about Abdul-Baha. He was really widely known as Abbas Effendi, and as I said, during his long exile, many met him. Many, the rumors spread about his intelligence, about his knowledge about religion, politics, and so on. So it's not surprising that Abdul-Baha got into contact, and then after these positive encounters, also got released in the end after the revolution.
That's very interesting. Joe asks this question: do you know of any memoirs or autobiographies from those Ottoman officials which might mention Babis and Baha'is? Are there families which may still be around? Are there families that still may be around, identifiable, who might have such material?
That's a very good question. We have some of the young Ottoman reformers. For example, the one I showed, Namık Kemal. He was, for example, exiled to Cyprus, to Famagusta, where Mirza Yahya was exiled, and the four Baha'is. And in letters written from Famagusta to his family, whoever in Istanbul, he mentions the Babis actually, but in a very bad way. So the Babis around were actually Mirza Yahya and his companions or his family. So we have one reference by Namık Kemal, very negative, and he only mentions one Baha'i he appears to, as a good man, and I guess this is Mishkin Kalam. I have to check it again. I think he met him as well. And then we have other young Ottoman reformers who were also exiled during the reign of Sultan Abdulaziz, for example, to Akka. And 2 or 3 of those, especially one mentions Abbas Effendi and the Babi, or as he says, the Babi community in Akka, and he describes it in a very positive way. And the families, it's a very good question. I was chasing for years to find, families of those reformers who might have still the letters of Abdul-Baha, actually. I don't know. I wasn't successful. I just was successful in one thing, and I showed you this Bedri Pasha with his 2 daughters in this photograph. I succeeded to find a great granddaughter of his in West Turkey, and she still had some photographs and some memoirs from his great grandfather, so Bedri Pasha. But she didn't know about anything about Baha'i or anything.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Fantastic. So Meshkin Galam would have been on Cyprus from 1868 to 72 or 73 or something like that, when he finally escaped and went to Akka.
Yes.
So that's the time that we're talking about, that particular reference.
Exactly. And those Ottoman reformers were exiled from 1873 to 76. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the time. You
Mm.
mentioned Yusuf Zia Pasha in Washington. What do we know about him other than his role in Washington? In other words, do you know of him having been a young Turk, or was he involved in the government there in Istanbul before being sent to Washington, D.C.?
He was a young Turk because he was representing the young Turk government. At the same time, he is described by Mazigel as a fierce Muslim, as a very religious one. But I did some research. I think he was somehow involved in music or establishing a library in Istanbul. I'm not sure, but usually these pashas were not just political persons, but even the sultans. Abdulaziz, for example, was a great composer. He composed Western classical music, for example.
Really?
Or or Ottoman music. So reminiscent of Western classical music, and it's really amazing. And also these pashas were authors. They were mystics. There were many qualities actually.
They were very learned men. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
most of them
I can't
definitely.
quite imagine someone in that time trying to create Ottoman music for the cello and piano or something like that.
Even Sultan Abdul Hamid, who's now utilized by the Islamists in Turkey as a very religious person, he was not. you know, he utilized Islam as an ideology, but we know from his daughter's memoirs he drank alcohol. He loved more Western music than Turkish music,
Huh.
and all sorts of things. So who is Muslim, who is not?
Right. How would he have had access to Muslim music, Western music? Would he have had hired Western musicians to come to Istanbul?
Also,
Because
yes,
there were no
yes.
recordings, of course.
He invited people over, like actors, musicians, and then yeah, he was, even though he's described as a very autocratic person, he was open for ideas as well.
Interesting. You mentioned Jamal Pasha, and I was really quite amazed that the man actually met Abdul-Baha and even was impressed by him.
Yes.
But then, of course, changed his mind later. So what's the
Yes.
trajectory after that? After he has his army beaten by the British, what happens to him after the war?
That's actually, Shoghi Effendi makes reference to the three pashas, Enver, Talat, and Jamal. They were all killed by enemies.
Huh. Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting.
Basically by Armenians.
Huh. Interesting.
As a revenge, as a revenge for that,
The Armenian genocide.
Yes, yes.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Yes.
interesting.
Yes.
That's very interesting, considering that it's being denied even today in Turkey. That's
So yeah, it depends where you are, where you stand.
well, yes, of course. That's quite interesting. I'm curious. Next week, when we're not next week, next time when we talk about the Turkish letters of Abdul-Baha, are you going to refer to some of these letters, like to Bedri
Yes.
Pasha and such?
I can refer to those and also to tablets to Baha'is as well. Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Do we have more tablets to Ottoman reformers or more to Baha'is, do you think, in Turkish?
Actually, there are more to Ottoman reformers or to high and low, Ottoman, even daily affairs, and these, I think these are around 300, and the tablets to Baha'is, they were around 150, 200 at most.
That makes sense, because it's almost more diplomatic correspondence, and there were not a large number of Baha'is who were primarily Turkish speaking. Those were mostly Azeris, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't see any other questions right offhand, and perhaps we'll get one or two more here. But that's been really, this has been a fascinating discussion, and really had no idea that Abdul-Baha was so deeply in contact with the Young Turks. That really is important. And I guess you've published on that in some of these books. That
Yes, it's in the book you mentioned, Dissent and Heterodoxy, and then later on, I published this article, "The Young Turks and the Baha'is in Palestine," which you can easily find on my academic website on Academia Edu, and so they talk about these Turkish letters to young Turks. So it's all there.
Another question that Saeed has: are there any references in talks or writings by Abdul-Baha to the Armenian genocide?
I haven't seen anything actually. No, not that I know. No.
Yeah, interesting. I don't see any other comments right offhand, and I'm glad to say that our audience rebounded after this problem with the stream, which I think it was my fault. I'll be able to avoid that problem next time. I think I'm still getting used to how to use StreamYard. But we will put the recording up that we have, and at some point, Necati, if you and I can get together and perhaps record through slide 18 or so, then if I can figure out how to, I will stick those two halves together.
Yes, sure.
There's also another question here Saeed just raised. If it's not an issue, a sensitive issue, do you have any knowledge of contacts between Baha'u'llah or Abdul-Baha and the early Jewish immigrants to the Holy Land?
No, I don't. Actually, there's this new book by Joshua Lincoln about Abdul-Baha Effendi. He mentions some Hebrew sources and contacts with Jewish people in Palestine. That would be very good. It's a very good book. So Joshua Lincoln, Abdul-Baha Effendi. You can order it, I think, already at Amazon or
Yeah, it just came out in the fall of last year.
Exactly.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I think that's all of our comments and questions that I can see. Thank you again, Necati. This was really a marvelous presentation and quite fascinating. To remind everybody, in I think it's 3 weeks, the second weekend of October, Necati will be back for his third and last talk for at least a year or so about Abdu'l-Baha's writings in Turkish. And of course, we have relatively little available in English about those tablets. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from him about those tablets. So I think that's it today from the Corinne True Center for Baha'i Studies. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Goodbye for now.
Thanks.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye.